forth, and whenever we got someone talking, I'm right in his way of launching you guys. No.
That's my fault. Sorry. I'd like to call to order the Planning Commission, City of Oak Harbor, regular meeting, November 26, 2019. We're running just a minute and a half late. Meeting comes to order. Roll call. Let it be known that we're 100% this evening. Item number 2, approval of the minutes of the October 22nd meeting. Do I have a motion?
Mr. Chairman, I recommend to approve the minutes as presented.
I have a motion, a second.
A second.
Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Approved. Third item, public comment. As per every meeting, we allow the first 15 minutes for the public comment on anything other than what's on the agenda this evening. Seeing a few people in the audience, do I have any takers? Very good, then I'll close that part of our meeting. Item number 4, this is a public hearing, or will be, 2019 Comprehensive Plan Amendment. And I'm going to let Steve Powers take over on that item.
All right, thank you, Chairman Wassinger, members of the Planning Commission, Steve Powers, Director of Development Services, pinch hitting for CAC Camac this evening. This is the 2019 Comprehensive Plan docket public hearing. Know that you are very familiar with it, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on the presentation. I also know that CAC prepared an excellent staff report for you, and so I'll do my best to breeze through this PowerPoint, but please, of course, ask any questions that you might have. As you know, our 2019 docket had the items that you see displayed on the screen. We were taking up the issue of the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan, the Economic Development element, Capital Improvement Plan, Housing element, and then the getting conversation about the Joint Planning Area, Urban Growth Area boundary. As you can see also, as CAC has briefed you, 3 of those items are actually part of your package this evening. 2 of them, the housing element and the JPA, will be moving on to the 2020 docket, which I think we'll start talking to you about at your next meeting, proving there's no rest for the weary. So the Parks, Recreation, Open Space Plan, as you know, Council adopted that plan earlier this year. And so since it's a separate document, our obligation with our open space, our Parks, Recreation, Open Space element is to pull out the guiding principles, the goals and policies, and the recommended plan, and then incorporate that into the element of the comprehensive plan. And so that's what we've done for you. Capital Improvement Plan, this was probably the lion's share of the work this year, as it is many years. And what we typically do is the same thing that we did this year. We look at the status of the projects and the schedule of them. We take out those projects that are complete or on their way to becoming complete. We reflect those projects which are in progress. We adjust the project schedules, all of those things that we've done. And then CAC was making note of 2 major projects that were added. Pioneer Way waterline replacement, City Beach to SR 20, and then the Goldie Road Basin Sewer, which we're viewing also as an economic development project, and the approximate timeframes where we hope to be starting and finishing those projects. The economic development element, those amendments came out of the joint workshop that you folks had with the City Council earlier this year. We added language reflecting the creation of the Opportunity Zone. We made some changes in names and terminology, and then we combined and simplified some of the policies. And I think at that workshop there was a new phrase coined, the zombie policy. And so we've endeavored to start to get rid of some of the zombie policies in there. But we do also see there will be additional work in 2020. So this one kind of straddles it, part this year, part next year. Housing element, again, a major topic of conversation during the joint workshop. At that time, we talked to you about the House bills that were passed, that became law, During your pre-meeting, I gave you a quick update on the grant application that we submitted for the Housing Action Plan. That was approved. We see that effort taking most of next year. So we're going to continue this item into 2020, continue our work in this area with the Housing Action Plan. We'll also continue to be thinking about and reviewing the recommendations that came from the Affordable Housing Task Force a couple of years ago. So lots of different things can potentially inform the housing element of the comprehensive plan. Joint planning area, urban growth area boundary. Our big goal this year was to start the conversation with the county and have them take that up and agree to put it into their docket. I'm happy to tell you that we were successful in that endeavor. Earlier this year, I think actually November 5th, county commissioners approved it to be part of the county's docket for 2020. The city and the county will cooperate in identifying options that will be considered by both bodies. We're really going to approach this as a joint project rather than the city have some proposals and send them to the county feel like they have to respond or change those. Both staffs are going to work together, and once we've laid the technical groundwork, then we're going to talk to our various planning commissions and elected officials, and we're also going to be appearing at each other's meetings. So really going to try a different approach to the project this year. So we're going to continue this item into our docket for 2020 as well. So as you saw by looking at your staff report, the Oak Harbor Municipal Code establishes a series of review criteria that we're supposed to review comprehensive plan amendments against. I'm not going to go through these in any great detail. I'm sure that you read them in your staff report. Things such as the amendment shouldn't adversely affect public health, safety, and welfare. That's a pretty standard kind of thing. The amendment needs to comply with GMA and the countywide planning policies. Again, if you think about it, that makes a lot of sense. That it addresses community needs or changing circumstances or resolves inconsistency in the existing plan. Continuing on in those criteria, any amendment needs to be consistent with the plan's land use and growth projections, et cetera, et cetera. And as you saw by looking at the staff report, the staff analysis concluded that the 2019 amendments are consistent with the applicable criteria. So just to refresh your memory on a couple of the key dates for this process, the council approved the docket for this year in April. We had that joint workshop with them in September. Discussion with you folks in October, council workshop also in October. Here we are this evening for your public hearing, and then we have this scheduled for council consideration at the December 17th meeting, the last meeting of the year. So your recommended action this evening is to conduct a public hearing and then recommend approval of the 2019 comprehensive plan amendments to the city council, and of course I'd be happy to help you with any questions you might have.
So at this time, I would open the public hearing for the public to make comment. Do I have anybody that would like to speak to the issues? So if not, I'll close that part and then we will deliberate as council. Is that
Yes,
fair?
and I guess, again, I'm available to help with whatever questions you might have.
With the commission? Hal?
So a few things here. I'm going to bring up this SR 20 Fackmer Road property access question again because I still can't wrap my head around it.
Yes, sir.
So 2 years ago, we had it in the Transportation Improvement Plan, which was done shortly after Fair and Pierce did a fairly lengthy transportation plan for us, which we had priorities of 50 items or more on there. And that was not in that piece that Fair and Pierce produced. Then last year, we moved it out of the Transportation Improvement Plan and moved it into the Economic Development with the goal of getting a grant, which didn't happen because of other priorities, other higher priorities. And now we don't have a separate Transportation Improvement Plan because it's now been rolled into the Capital Improvements Plan since the discovery that we didn't need to do that, and it's back on. So where is the funding coming from for this? And how does it fit in the list of city priorities? Do you know?
The funding for this comes from the sources that you see. I believe we've got some REIT in it, and I'm looking, Mr. Hovey, on master page 41 of the packet.
Right, that's right.
Yes. 41.
Some of it's coming out of 101. I don't believe any of it's coming out of 105. We did have, we were slated to try to put some grant funding in there. Of course, as you know, that didn't pan out. I can tell you it was a budgeted project in the 19 and 20 budget, absent the grant funding. So while we were pursuing the grant funding, we did not require it in order to accomplish the project.
So
Priority-wise, I don't think it's one of our highest priorities. We do see it as an economic development issue. We also see it as a safety issue, again, because our primary goal there is for those properties that front the highway in that area to not have direct access to the highway given the convergence of the different lane configurations and the speed. And so we believe it's much safer for those properties to be accessed from the eastern boundary off of Fakima Road.
So part of the reason I asked this question is because it looks like the voters approved the Transportation Benefit District. So we're going to have a new revenue source to pay for street improvements. And we have a list in the Fair and Pierce product that has a prioritized list of streets. I'm just concerned that we don't do another plan that basically pulls road improvements from who knows where instead of following the plan that we produced, which was a very good plan and very well thought out and had a lot of public input. I just hope that next year we don't show another street on here that wasn't in that 50 list priority. So, do we know yet how the Transportation Benefit District is going to be implemented in this, other than just a separate line item on the funding source?
Well, we're going to use the Street Savers program and that tool, that document that created that very extensive list of projects as our blueprint for the projects which the Transportation Benefit District tax will fund. We had a preliminary meeting just this week to talk about the next steps in the process in terms of becoming organized. We've started to talk about when we believe the funding will become available, with the goal of still actually trying to do the first of the projects still at the tail end of next year, because when the funding becomes available, there won't be much of a window left for the chip sealing projects that we'll do in the local streets. So TBD will get its project list from the Street Saver program first and foremost.
Some of the numbers I don't understand. I'm looking at page 48 out of 596, where 48, where we have a total for parks of 17,858 million, but there's a line item that's 20 million, so I don't.
Yeah, there's a typo in there somewhere. Thank you for pointing that out.
And the same thing over on the next page under general government for the two senior center, or the two, whatever they are, senior center and special events center. You
Yeah,
got
good
15
catch.
million that adds up to 27 million. So we might want to
We'll
go
have
over
to
that
check-
before it goes to city council
We'll
next
check the
week.
formulas, yeah. There's a bust in the formula, yeah.
I believe there's 3 errors.
Okay,
Was there another one?
Yeah. 412 wastewater. It's got a Goldie Road project for 2.3 million, with a grand total of 2.6 million. There's only one line item.
pretty hard to say there's a bust in the formula, but I'm gonna stick by that one for right now.
That's all I had.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Hovey.
Any other comments? Questions?
I just want to make one comment. I'm familiar with the issues that they're talking about, where you put something on the plan, 7, 8 years ago, and it still hasn't gone forward. But I also look at it from a different standpoint as well. And I know the the road off of Fakaba, for that access to that property, we didn't know the state was gonna close down access to that parcel. It's also an understanding that by putting that road in, it's gonna be a huge tax revenue for the city, which we also have to look at. It might not be to our best interests, you know, on our own opinion or something like that, but the way I look at it is, the piece of property was offered to a company, and then the state says, because it wasn't developed, you've lost your access to that property. So now, in order to bring in this large money-making operation, they have to do something to get access to the property. And that's the only way they can do it. So I understand the reasons behind it, and we do have to be cognizant of, there's other things behind the plan that comes to play that we don't always know about.
I understand the reasons behind it, I just don't want there to be any perception that we're doing a shell game.
No,
By
and-
Things from one place to another place and then bringing something else in. That's my main concern.
Well, I know,
is the-
I look at that from 7th Street, you know, that's been a craw in my side for a long time. We can't seem to get it done. But,
We're actively working on that one. And it is challenging, and I know, trust me, or I hope you'll trust me when I say that staff is anxious for Northeast 7th Avenue to be done as well, because we certainly see the need for it, particularly when we look at the land uses and the development that's occurring or scheduled or possibly to occur in that area. When we look at that populations that's served and where the services are located on the highway, we really need to improve the pedestrian facilities along 7th Avenue, and it just needs to be a better street for our traveling public. There are layers of things which sometimes get in our way as we're trying to work on these projects, one of which, of course, are other projects. So we are very, very anxious to get that project done. And I think the IRTPO is anxious for us to get it done as well. It's continued to be a high priority in the region, and they've been steadfast in their support, and I don't think we want to let that support fade away.
Oh, yeah, okay, if it's not me, I'm
Well,
happy
you're
to
up. You're up.
go. Actually, just to touch back on what Hal was asking, if the Transportation Benefit District, when you said the priorities for that come out of the streets of the program, there's no reference in here to any of that. Is it?
It's because we didn't know for sure at the time that we were preparing all of this, whether that would be a thing or not.
Okay.
Right? And
Well, that's fair.
so next year's CIP, while we've yet to establish even the rudimentary framework of what it's going to look like, next year's CIP is going to have to address the Transportation Benefit District funding, the separate project list, because one of the things that the mayor and council and the staff are absolutely committed to is transparency in how those tax dollars are being utilized. We feel very fortunate that the voters thought enough of it to say, yes, we want to improve our local streets, and we're going to tax ourselves to do that. And so anything less than 100% transparency will be a failure on our part.
Okay.
Is there an estimated amount of revenue? Has that been,
I'm going to turn to my Transportation Benefit District expert, and I think it's around 900,000.
900,000.
930 last,
that's annually?
based on the
Annual?
figures from 2018.
That's per year.
130,000 per year.
But that'll vary depending upon the revenue that we get from sales tax.
Yeah.
So, but the estimate is 930, so it could be plus or minus. Depends on the economy, so, yeah,
People
and
still
just,
shopping in Oak Harbor.
yeah.
One of the things we talked about with the capital improvement plan was the reference earlier in the plan to items that are classified as urgent or reconstruction or new and expansion. We talked about adding a column into these tables, starting at page 41, and I see that didn't make it in, much to my dismay. These would be, yeah, we did talk about it last year, and I was under the impression that it was going in. In fact, I almost remember that it had been in at one point.
I think
somewhere along the way
I think
line.
CAC presented a version of what that would look like, if I recall correctly, and I thought that it became somewhat convoluted to show that. I
Oh.
may be mistaken,
Okay,
Mr. McFeeters, but I thought that was what we did.
My
okay.
impression was that he basically thought everything was urgent. Otherwise, it wouldn't be in there.
It's all important.
I don't really understand what's going on with these tables. It's different from last year's version where we have this 2020 approved budget and then a column for 2020 project budget, which is 2020 plus the 2019 balance. If I understand that correctly, just on this first item, annual street improvements, it has an approved budget of $400,000 for 2020 and a project budget of $1,241,538. And to the layman's eye, that means that we didn't spend $841,000 this year.
Correct.
So
And-
why is that?
Well, first, let me address why we're trying this different approach, and it is really truly an experiment. The reason that we're trying this approach is that the city is working towards doing a more robust project accounting system in terms of each individual project. And not to go too budget geek on it, previously, if a project was not started in the calendar year, budget year that it was budgeted for, you had to do a carryover request to move that money over to the following year, basically re-justify the project. And there are pluses and minuses to that approach. One of the minuses is that if it was a significant enough project to budget, should you actually do that again, or should those funds continue to be obligated to that project and you just know that you just didn't get it started and you got to get it going the next year?
Sure.
So what this is trying to do is take advantage of our new process, which sets up individual, and one part I left out is that it may have also been in a much larger fund. So it wasn't an individual project, it was lumped in with other projects and the funding source got rolled over.
Okay.
Now what we're working with is individual project line items, projects that are created, those are funded. And so once it's funded, then that money is available for that project until or unless the project is actually canceled. And so now we have them by individual project rather than rolling it up, say, into the Fund 101 for streets. Each one has its own item. So what we're trying to show here is that there was funding allocated in 19. The project may not have gotten all the way done or may not have gotten initiated, and that money is still available and it's being added to the 2020 funding that may have been approved for that same project or that same category of projects. We had some lively discussions at the staff level as to whether this would be as transparent as what we hoped, and what we concluded is if it doesn't send the message that we're interested in, we're probably going to go back to the old way that we showed these tables.
Well, I certainly think that there's some value in showing appropriations still available or something like that.
Yeah. The tough part
but
is,
it
you know,
didn't-
we have a 6-year window, and that window always is sliding one year at a time.
Yeah.
If all you were doing is dropping off a year off of the 6-year table and eventually got down to 0 years and you started again, you would do these tables differently, but that's not the convention.
Okay. That still brings up the question of why didn't those projects go forward?
There are only so many of us, and that's
Okay.
that's the straight answer. I
Okay.
mean, there are a handful of planners, a handful of engineering staff, and a handful of street, in this case, a handful of street staff.
And I know from a management point of view, we did look at that, and accountability was discussed, and that was a question that on the staff level we did examine. And we looked at how we prioritize, and we look at how we allocate the resources. So there was a lot of discussion on that issue.
No, that totally makes sense to me.
Yeah.
It does beg the question of whether we're trying to put too many projects into current years or not, but that's a sort of separate issue.
And we actually have spent a lot more time in the last, I would say, 3 to 4 years, really trying to balance projects versus available staff resources. Because obviously, it's not just the streets table. It's the streets
Right.
table, the water table, the sewer table, the storm drain table, and the everything else table. And so maybe our combined resources could tackle all of them on one table.
Right.
And so in years previous, I don't think we spent as much time looking across the different utilities and trying to figure out if we do a big street project in this window, we shouldn't be trying to do a bunch of water lines. Those water lines ought to come over here somewhere.
Yeah.
And we're making, I think, strides in really allocating not only dollar resources, but staff resources across the project.
Okay.
I
Fair
I
enough.
think we try to be a little too optimistic, maybe.
Sure.
Well, I can understand that. I have similar problems at work myself. And then I spotted a couple things in the same vein of what Hal mentioned. There's in your table 4.11, Parks and Recreation, the total at the bottom is $17,858,000, but your second line, Northwest Regional Park Development, is $20 million. So
Yeah,
that
we'll look for
total
that
seems
bust.
low.
There's a bust there somewhere.
Yeah, there's an item missing in wastewater, et cetera. And then,
So to recap in there, I have 4.11, 4.12, and 4.15 that need a little math work.
Looks like
yes.
4.13 too.
8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13.
We'll check that one, Mr. Phillip.
That one looks like it might tie, but, okay. And then, a little further in, this would be on page 31 of the plan, 53 in the packet. You've got a table, this is the start of some tables having to do with revenue sources. And it looks like the tables just got copied because they still have a 2019 column, and the 2025 column looks like it's just a copy of the 2024 column in every case. Whereas I'm sure those numbers aren't going to be identical from year to year, 24 and 25. These aren't huge issues. but
Traditionally,
just
it's always
another
done
one.
5 years out, that's all.
What's that?
Traditionally, it's just 5 years, and that,
Well, yeah, the budget year and 5 years, but this one retains 2019 when it's
Yeah.
the 2020. So, I think that's all I've got. I didn't really spend too much time taking a look at the parks and open plan because we've been through that so many times. And the economic development changes seemed minor, so I'm good with all of that.
I would be remiss if I didn't say that we appreciate the Planning Commission's careful review of these documents. You know, extra sets of eyes are obviously very helpful. Because after you work them for so long, you can't see the numbers for the page.
Part of my background is in doing user manuals, and I have exactly the same problem.
Yeah.
So, all right, Mr. Chairman, I'm done.
I'll say one other thing, you know, it's, in closing, you know, we're actually in a perfect storm right now. You know, we've been doing these, you know, these 5 years or 4 years, whatever the case might be, but everything that we touch, it seems like the steel has gone up, you know, the air has gone up, the water has gone up, everything. So when we go into a plan and we start proposing, and the engineers are making their best guess, and that's really all it is at time and point. But then when they start pouring concrete or digging, the cost of sometimes double. Again, when we come down to 2022 or 2023, it could be a complete reversal of the economic series we're in right now. So that can skew the numbers as well, and things drop off dramatically at that point in time. It was funny, I was just looking at the one thing we were talking about, motor fuel tax money that the city gets. You know, we keep going to all these electric vehicles and such, and also there's no, you know, that tax number drops off as well, because you're not, you know, so that's
Yeah.
another issue. But I understand where it goes and what it takes, and the park, you know, that started off one way, but because the economic climate was growing, everything started costing more and more and more, and it balloons out of proportion in very quick. So I have to look at it that way as well, but I think you did a pretty good job.
Thank you. Again, we appreciate your careful review.
Tony? Zach? Good? Any other?
there's no other discussion, I recommend that we forward the 2019 comprehensive plan amendments to the city council for approval.
I second it.
In a second. Call for the question. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Powers. Second item on the agenda this evening is the Howard's Point. This will be a public hearing. The Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on the proposed 19-lot single-family subdivision on 3.93 acres located on southwest Fort Nugent Avenue, east of Boone Road. The project is located in the R1 zone district, and the applicant proposes a planned residential development, PRD, which will include open space and amenities for residents in exchange for smaller minimum lot sizes, but not increased density. The Planning Commission may make a recommendation to the City Council at the conclusion of the hearing. And now we have Ray Lindenberg to guide us through this project.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, before we do that,
Yes.
we're going to go through the appearance of fairness.
Oh, yes,
Call
of
it.
course.
Yes.
How foolish. How foolish.
And before I jump into my script here, I want to inform the commission, I've been a little too conservative in how I've asked you to answer those questions. It's not necessary for me to call upon each of you by name after I've asked the question. To break things up, we'll start with Mr. McFeeters, and we'll work our way around this time. And you can just each all answer. I don't have to call you by name to get your answer from you. So, as you know, RCW 4236 requires that members of this body determine prior to the staff presentation of a quasi-judicial matter whether the appearance of fairness doctrine requires that he recuse himself from sitting on the matter. In light of that requirement, I'll ask you some questions before we begin the hearing. I'll ask the questions as a group, and then we'll start with Mr. McFeeder, and you can all just each answer in sequence, please. So, question number one. Does any member of this commission have knowledge of or have conducted business with either the proponents or opponents of this application?
No.
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 No. No.
Number two, does any member of this commission either have a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest in the outcome of this proceeding?
No.
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 No. No.
Does any member of this commission know whether or not their employer has a financial interest in the property or area which will be impacted by the decision in this proceeding?
No.
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 No. No.
Does any member of this commission live or own property within 300 feet of the area which will be impacted by the decision in this proceeding?
No.
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 No. No.
Does any member of this commission have any special knowledge about the substance of the merits of this proceeding which would or could cause the commission member to prejudge the outcome of it?
No.
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 No. No.
Is there any member of this commission who believes that he cannot sit and hear this matter fairly and impartially both as to the respective positions of the proponents and the opponents in the proceeding?
No.
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 No. No.
And has any commission member had any ex parte contacts concerning this matter?
No.
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 No. No.
And then I'll ask finally, is there any member of the audience who, because of the appearance of fairness doctrine, wishes to disqualify a member of the commission from hearing this matter? If so, please state the commission member and reasons why you believe that he should be disqualified. Take that as a no, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Turn it back over to you.
Very good then. So, we haven't opened the public hearing yet, so we're going to let Ray speak. Or would you like me to open the public hearing and then you can speak?
You're the chairman.
I would suggest opening.
Okay, I opened the public hearing so that everything that Ray says is
On the record.
on the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Planning Commission. Your introduction has eliminated my need to spell out all of the project information there. So these are all, this is all data that's available in your staff report. But as you mentioned, we are looking at a 19-lot single-family subdivision located on Fort Nugent Avenue. This is the subject location, just to give you an idea of where we're located at. I'm not going to blind anybody over here, but this is the parcel. We got Fort Nugent Road, Boone Road, and then Downfield Way goes directly across Fort Nugent from this site. To give you a little bit of background on the project timeline, in April of 2019, we got a pre-app submitted for 20-lot subdivision located at this location. We went through that process with the applicant, and they responded back with a full application in June of 2019. That was for 20 lots at that time. In September of 2019, after discussion and comments from staff, they resubmitted with 19 lots. They reduced the lot count by 1 to allow for some additional parking and just kind of a reorientation of the lots a little bit to allow for that. And then in November, we issued a SEPA determination of non-significance. That DNS does have the original 20-lot configuration because of when it was submitted, but we have determined that the 19-lot subdivision is of less of an impact, so we don't really feel like that's too much of a concern. It's kind of up to a certain point when we issue the DNS, and so as long as there's less of an impact, we're going to be okay with that. So tonight we are looking at several different applications, preliminary plat, a PRD, a landscape plan, a land clearing plan, and transportation concurrency. And as I mentioned, we did the SEPA DNS. That is not something that the Planning Commission or City Council provides action on, so we just mentioned that in there. That is part of the application, but it's not up for any action this evening. This is a plat of the property. We show the 19 lots there. North is off to the right instead of up on this. As you remember, the property is aligned north and south in a rectangular fashion, so you can see that we've rotated 90 degrees there. Fort Nugent Road is on the right-hand side. The application includes the 19 lots. It also includes a street that continues through that way. It stubs out on the east side and also stubs out on the west side up here. There is a retention area right there that's also partially open space. We have landscaping along Fort Nugent and sidewalk, curb gutter and sidewalk improvements along there. And then an open space tract right here. And you'll notice that there is a large cul-de-sac kind of structure there. That is to allow for turnaround temporarily until the property to the east develops and that street continues through. And so that is subject to people turning around there. There will be a curb gutter and sidewalk installed, but at some later point, the curve will be finished off, and that will just become kind of a standard elbow corner there. Taking a look at the landscape plan, that's kind of hard to see up there, I understand, but again, we mentioned that there is the kind of community park here, the neighborhood park right there. And then you have your open space detention pond over here and the full landscaping along the street frontages. Got your street trees and park strips along there. One thing I did not mention on the previous one is there is a private driveway right here that serves 2 homes off of there. That is the subject of one of your permissive variation requests there. That's to allow for access to those 2 homes without providing a full street frontage, which reduces our impervious surface and makes it easier to have reasonably sized lots in other locations as well. This is the proposed architecture of the homes on the site. We have these 4 here and then 2 more right there. The proposal includes materials that have kind of higher aesthetic quality than your typical just horizontal siding. We have stone and brick facades there, as well as the hardy plank and hardy panel siding. So the review process going into this, the City Council shall inquire into the public use and interest proposed to be served by the establishment of subdivision dedication. It's pretty much asking if we are providing public good here by allowing this subdivision to be developed. So in the preliminary plat, there are 2 criteria there: whether the appropriate provisions have been made for the public health, safety, general welfare, et cetera, including all utilities, parks and recreation, all the things that go along with the development of the subdivision. And then B, whether the public use and interest will be served by the platting of the subdivision and the dedications therein. And the PRD review criteria, because this is a PRD and not just a subdivision, we have the standards of the Oak Harbor Municipal Code that include Chapter 1920, which is the R1 zone district, and Title 21, which is the subdivision code. The PRD requirements from Chapter 1931 of the Oak Harbor Municipal Code, And then within 1931, it allows for permissive variations from chapters 19 and 21. And I should have put 1920 on there because there is a distinction there. You have standards there within 1920, which are the R1 zone district. You also have the standards of Title 21, which is the subdivisions title. You cannot vary from anything that's in 1931 because those are the requirements of the PRD code itself. So you can only vary from the items there in 1920, which is the underlying zoning, and then the subdivision code. So the PRD variations that they have requested, we have 5 that are from 1920 and 4 that are from Title 21. The 5 from 1920 all pretty much stem from the minimum lot size request. They're asking for smaller lots than typical, which is 7,200 square feet. They're going down to about 4,800. And thereby, you need to reduce some of the other dimensional criteria there, including the minimum lot width, the front yard setback, side yard setback, rear yard setback. And I do want to note that the rear yard setback, they have requested 10 feet. However, as you can see around the perimeter of this subdivision, there is an open space tract that includes a pathway. And also when you have a PRD subdivision, we require a 20-foot setback around the perimeter. So essentially what they're asking for is not changing the setback from the perimeter of the subdivision itself. They're just asking for the ability to build within or up to 10 feet from the rear yard property or rear property line, which is 10 feet off of the perimeter of the subdivision itself. So that doesn't change anything from the standpoint of how it's being developed from where it is right now, just within the subdivision itself. So the variations from Title 21 include the minimum lot width, and that's just a repeat of what's in 1920. The size, shape, and orientation of the lots, again, a repeat. Frontage on the public street, which I mentioned previously, those 2 lots, they're going to be fronting off of a private driveway. And then block layout and future connections. And the reason behind that, and I forgot to put this on here, I apologize for that, but it is in your staff report. You'll notice that typically you might expect to see a connection through this way or perhaps a connection to the south. What the situation is here is on the neighboring parcel. I'm going to flip back to here. There is a wetland right in this area here. And so it makes the development of this parcel immediately adjacent rather difficult. And so rather than requiring a connection through that may never be actually developed, we just have this one here and then the one down here on the east side to allow for development on neighboring parcels without just having dead-end stubs that will be zombie stubs, to borrow a term. So that is the reasoning behind that. Staff agrees with that assessment. The applicant showed us kind of a lotting pattern that might happen with that wetland considered there, and it doesn't show for a lot of development possibilities, so we don't need to have a lot of streets going into it. So based on the information that was provided to us, staff recommends that the Planning Commission forward a positive recommendation to the City Council. We have gone through our expert opinion on this and determined that they have met the standards and criteria that are found in Chapter 1920 and 1931, including Title 21 as well. And we have some minor issues that will be polished out. There's parking that's going to be required on the street that we can kind of get figured out. There's some movement that'll need to happen with that, but it'll still meet the substantive criteria of what we have in front of us today. I don't see that being an issue going forward. The applicant's been very helpful working with us on these issues, so we don't see any issue with that. So based on that, we have the five permits there to go through. And then the recommended action is to conduct the public hearing and then forward that recommendation to the City Council. I'm available for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ray. So at this time, I think I'll ask for comments from the audience, if anyone cares to address the... Okay, then I will call upon the body here to ask questions, make comments.
I would got comments. Questions. Page 284 and 285, you make a comment about a crosswalk, and I'm wondering, is that, did I lose you?
Please take it. Oh, sure, thank you, Greg.
284 and 285. So this crosswalk that you refer to, is that a crosswalk on the south side of Fort Nugent, or does it cross Fort Nugent and go between Downfield on one side to the other?
Yes, that is correct. The concept here is to, and again, I'm turning this sideways 90 degrees. Downfield Way exits onto Fort Nugent right here. The crosswalk would be developed right here
Okay.
to go across. The issue is that we don't see a need to run, I mean, well, we can't. We don't have sidewalk going between here and Fort Nugent Park. So by providing that access across the street, it provides access to the neighboring subdivision there. And it also makes it possible to do a bus stop on either side for future transit. And because the nearest bus stop is way down at the park, which is about a half a mile.
That's what I was hoping would be the answer. The driveway lengths, they're going with the 20 feet minimum required setback for the garages. Are those from the edge of the sidewalk or the edge of the street?
It's the edge of the sidewalk.
So we shouldn't have any problems with the sidewalk being blocked by,
It should not, except for with very large trucks.
yeah.
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 That's generally been our standard, is to require a 20-foot driveway for the subdivisions we've been doing recently because of that issue.
So, you had mentioned about on-street parking being an issue, and I had a question about that because I noticed on this one, I also noticed it on the one that we did, the Gary Oak one, that there's projected parking, street parking spaces that are on the inside of a curve, which seems to me to be a dangerous thing.
Yeah, and we've been working with the applicant on that. What they've provided for us are some parking, like a little parking court right here.
Right.
And then there's opportunity for a very bare minimum of parking spaces along here because you have the driveways so close together. But we are working with them to make sure that we have enough parking spaces. There was an original proposal to put some in this area, which we can't allow for because that's an intersection essentially, even though it's just a curve right now. So we didn't see that as a reason to hold it up before coming to you. It's something that we can easily hammer out between the applicant and staff to make sure that they meet those standards. What we're looking at here is we're going to require nine or 10 parking spaces, one per every 2 lots. And so we feel that we can make that work.
So right now, they've got 13 on this diagram that you included in your packet,
Yes, and
and most of those are at the south end.
right, I might have to defer to the applicant on that one. I know there was, the reason that they went from 20 to 19 lots was to allow for wider lots over here and 3-car driveways, and that was one of the reductions that they're allowed to have, and so 13 sounds right. I apologize.
So where you've got the mailboxes right now, which is right there next to that stub, right at Downfield Way where it turns, is you're showing 2 parking spaces right on the next bend down there. If you go down on your green right there, right on
Yeah.
that bend, on the inside of the bend. So that's my concern there.
Yeah,
And
we-
you guys can work that out in the details.
Yeah.
but
I know
that's-
engineering staff was concerned about those, and I don't see those remaining where they are, but we'll get it
If I could
resolved.
just chime in just real quickly, Mr. Hovey, you're right, those things get ironed out at the civil plan stage,
Okay.
when we move, when everybody really sharpens their pencil. That's how those final details get ironed out. Position of parking, actual location of mailboxes, checking, make sure not conflicting with any other utilities. All of those things are really put under the magnifying glass in the next stage in the process.
Thank you, that's all I have.
Any other council?
I just have
Planning Commission?
one question. Looking at the various diagrams, we've got, this is a horizontal control plan, but there are a number of them that have this.
Back here in the beginning, it says the lot sizes go from 4,738 to 8,180 square feet. But looking on these diagrams, I don't see anything that's larger than 5,700 square feet. So I'm wondering where the other 2,400 square feet in some of these lots are.
I believe that might be a typo, and I apologize for that. The lot sizes are 4,300 to 5,700 approximately. I believe that's a typo. I do apologize.
Okay, well, that makes me feel better that I'm reading these diagrams correctly.
I'm glad it makes you feel better then.
Yeah, okay, I think that's really the only question I had about that. Thank you.
Yes, I always have something. I wanted to share with the commission, and I need to run this by Mr. Powers. I live across the street from this development. I don't have a conflict. It has nothing to do with me. My house is not within 300 feet of this. Where my concern comes in is on the CCNRs that's been provided on this project. The concern I have is, and I contacted Mr. Lindbergh about this, is this phase one of a larger project, was my question. And he says there's been nothing submitted for a larger project. So with that assumption, I'm thinking, okay, we have a lot of expenses on this project that are going to be the responsibility of those 19 property owners that are on this development. We've got a retention basin, which is only the second one that we've had. They've got a very expensive filtration and pumping system, which I'm very familiar with, which is very expensive to maintain each year because that's dependent on the city's inspection, and they do the inspection and tell you when to clean it. There's a lot of hardscape. We've got sidewalks completely all the way around this development, which is part of the setback. Will not be the responsibility of the city, will be the responsibility of the property owners or their HOA. On 3 sides of this property, you've got sidewalks with very mature trees that can do a lot of damage on sidewalks. Where's the money coming from to do all these repairs and do all the maintenance within this association? The other concern I have is in reading their documents, the RCW has changed from where Fairway Point is required to have a property management company. We can't eliminate the HOA like Fireside has done. So all of a sudden, now we've got all these expenses and they have the right to terminate this HOA. But then you've got a lot of expenses. Is this something that we should be worried about? To me, it is. So,
Mr. Freeman, appreciate your concern and the detailed nature of your question. Our typical approach on final plats, not at the preliminary plat stage, but on the final plat stage, and it's been that way for a good number of years, is to have a standardized note that says something to the effect of that the maintenance of the common facilities is the responsibility of the HOA. Should the HOA disband, it falls to each of the individual property owners. And so the city has on occasion had to essentially call that marker when an HOA has ceased to exist. And where we normally see it is in the maintenance of the storm drain system because we do that annual check on it. And so that's the mechanism that the city uses to make sure that the property owners are collectively still responsible for the cost of the maintenance that they basically signed up for when they bought into the plat.
okay, and using that, I understand it. And maybe I'm not comparing apples to apples, but apples to oranges from a standpoint as where I live, we can't disband per the RCW that was stipulated in our development. Now we're going down this PRD avenue where they're allowed to. So we can't do it. And we've got the reserves and we have the 176 properties, so it's spread around where it's not too costly. This development here is with 19 development properties, a lot of expenses. And there's just a fear there that if
I understand your concern, and
maybe not in 2 years, but in 5 years, there'd be a major concern about people walking away.
so one of the things that we've been learning the painful lesson on are on street trees. Even some of our more recent subdivisions, and by that I mean within the last decade or so, we've seen street trees that were chosen off of the city list, planted, followed the approvals that they had, and it's caused some challenges with some of the sidewalks and curbs. And so we're not constantly, but frequently evaluating what the appropriate street trees are, so that in the case where the city has responsibility, the city's not picking up the tab to fix buckled sidewalks and blown out curbs, or in the case where the private property owner is responsible, they're not stuck with that. Because nobody likes the situation where the city has to go after the property owner to pay for the damage that a tree that they didn't plant caused to a sidewalk in front of their house. And so we are progressing in the street trees that we allow to be planted in any particular new subdivision. So I think that takes care of a part of it. In some ways, the city has to play the cards that were dealt. And if the state, in their infinite wisdom, has decided that it's appropriate to allow HOAs to disband under certain circumstances, we don't have the ability to prevent that. But what we can do then, again, is make sure that that financial responsibility rests with each individual property owner. And again, as I said, we have enforced on that before in some other older neighborhoods. I think those are the tools that we have available to us.
Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments from the commissioners? Questions? I've talked to the public. I've talked to Ray. Ray doesn't have any more comments. Any other comments? And if not, I'll ask further questions. Motion. That question, yeah. Do we have a motion?
Okay. I think we require two, correct? I recommend that we forward to the city council the approval of the preliminary plat, preliminary PRD, and associated permit, subject to the conditions of approval.
Have a motion? Do I have a second?
I'll second that motion.
A second? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes.
I move that we adopt the findings of fact at attachment D for the Howard's Point.
Okay.
I'll second the motion.
Motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Motion passes. There we go. So the last item on the agenda this evening is a public meeting. It's the SMP Periodic Review Update. And it's brought to us by Dennis Lefebvre.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the commission. Wanted to take this opportunity tonight and just kind of give you a status report on the Shoreline Master Program periodic review process that we've engaged in. And as soon as we get the slide presentation up, we'll start, but it'll be a brief update. The last presentation I made with the Planning Commission was in June of this year. And I kind of gave you a format and a framework as to what we're looking at for this update process. And we don't have a PowerPoint
It
tonight.
doesn't appear to be in the drive, so word pictures, please.
Okay, well, we'll do the best we can without that. Yeah, there were a lot of words on the slides anyway, so it's beside the point. As I explained, there's a required steps that we need to engage in with this periodic review. There are actually 3 major steps that we need to look at, and this is out of the Washington Administrative Code. One is that we look at what changes have been made to the Shoreline Management Act, and also what kind of rule changes the Department of Ecology has made to their master program guidelines since the last major update, which was about 2007 or so. We actually completed our last Shoreline Master Program comprehensive update. We adopted it in 2012. The state adopted it in 2013. So we went back a number of years based on some guidance that was provided by the Department of Ecology, and looked at all those changes that had occurred. We are, I'll deal with that in just a second, but the second major issue that we are looking at is how does our Shoreline Master Program deal with the consistency with some of our local planning efforts and our development regulations. As part of your staff report, I listed all of the local and regional plans that I looked at to make sure that any policies that might affect the shoreline in some of those plans were consistent with what we had in our Shoreline Master Program. Quite an extensive list. I think there was 16 documents that I identified. Fortunately, we were consistent with all of those documents in their policy or regulations. The other big piece in step number 2 was making sure that this program is consistent with our development regulations. And the third step is that we actually have a PowerPoint. Thank you, Tim. Oh, okay. Thank you. And the third required step that we look at is review any changes in circumstances or new data that might be emerging, or improved data that we've used in the past that, you know, for scientific research or what have you, would improve that data. So basically, those 3 requirements is what we're using as our guidance for this periodic review. To kind of deal down a little bit closer on some of these steps, as I mentioned, the first one is to make sure that we incorporate all the Act changes and all the DOE changes since basically, well, the information they gave us goes back to 2007. We are looking at some of the changes that will evolve out of this effort. Department of Ecology did provide some review considerations and also some sample language to incorporate some of the changes that we will be making in conformance with those rule changes. We did a first pass on this document, and we're going to continue to look at it within staff at this point in time, and hopefully I'm looking at your February meeting where we can disseminate this information and actually start going through some of those changes that we're going to be looking at for this piece of the project. Step number 2 is to make sure that we're consistent with all those planning documents and the development regulations, as I mentioned. The extensive list we did look at, we are consistent with the local and regional planning efforts. We're in the process of looking at our new development regulations, and there's actually 3, 2 of them which were fairly large, and you were involved in the low impact development code amendment that we processed in 2016. We did some tweaking to our flood damage prevention code in 2017. And we finished up with our critical areas ordinance in 2018. So we're looking at those pieces of development regulations to make sure that we are linking up with our Shoreline Master Program in that regard. We've completed our analysis of the critical areas ordinance, and we're in the process of looking at the other 2, the flood damage prevention and the low impact development process. And again, sometime in early next year, maybe your February meeting, maybe a couple meetings after that, we're going to be presenting that information and going into more of a discussion on those potential changes. And of course, the third step is change circumstances, new information, improved data. What has evolved since the last Shoreline Master Program that we really need to address? And I've highlighted a couple of them. One is the sea level rise, and that's actually that is being brought forward by Ecology as an item that we really should start looking at. And our 2013 SMP was fairly silent when it comes to sea level rise, so we'll have some wording in there that deals with sea level rise. We'll discuss it at a staff level to see to what degree we'll need to address that, and then come to you with the potential amendments. Shoreline armoring has also been a big topic the last 5 or 6 years as far as soft armoring instead of the hard armoring. We're going to look at our SMP to see what kind of tweaking we can make that might give a little bit more incentive to soft shore armoring. We're also going to look at the Residential Bluff Conservancy designation review. I'll deal with that in just a minute as far as how we're going to be looking at that piece. But there might be some additional information that we will create out of a study that we're going to have a consultant look at that deals with that designation. And we're also always talking to state agencies. I'm in constant contact with the Department of Ecology. I hope to engage the Department of Natural Resources, Fish and Wildlife, as far as what they perceive as new information or improved information that we should at least look at for incorporation into our SMP. I figure that piece of information is going to take a little bit longer. It's probably going to come to you mid next year. So the other thing that we've been working on is our Department of Ecology Shoreline Grant. It was a no-brainer as far as competitive process. It's like you're at this population, you get this amount of money. Ours was $22,400. We are actually past the contract review stage. We're at the signing stage for this contract. And we anticipate the majority of these funds will be used for consultant assistance. And those services will be focusing, like I said, on the Residential Bluff Conservancy designation. There's been a lot of discussion, as you well know, on the interface of the shoreline and the bluff along Scenic Heights Road. Basically, that street there and the residences along the bluff make up that designation. So what we hope to do is get another consultant on board to do an in-depth study, take a look at the geology, the hydraulics, that interface, to make sure that what we have in our critical areas code and our shoreline master program policies and regulations effectively maintains that sensitive interface between the bluff and the shoreline while maintaining the private property rights along there. So we anticipate working with the consultant, getting a consultant on board fairly soon, and then also in mid next year I would anticipate bringing forward some information, results from that consultant work.
I'm assuming that's a third-party consultant, not a city staff.
That's correct. It'll be a third-party consultant. Yeah. The other piece that we have prepared, and it's part of your packet, is a public participation plan. That gives us a strategy and kind of a framework as to how are we going to bring this information out to the public and how can we get the public involved in this discussion on the shoreline update. It's not a requirement of the periodic review, however, it is a requirement of the DOE grant that we have a public participation plan. So we prepared one, it's part of your packet, and we'll use that as a guide for our public participation strategy. We also have a target timeline as part of that PPP. That's always kind of a shifting timeline depending on your agendas and council's agendas, but we'll try to stick to that as close as possible. And also, finally, we've got the development of the webpage presence. Sarah's been doing a lot of the heavy lifting, well, she's been doing a lot of the work, not heavy lifting, but she's been doing a lot of the work with me on the development of that webpage presence, which is really an implementation tool for the public participation process. And it's been a good tool for getting the word out. In fact, it is ready to go now. There's information on this website. I don't have the URL up there, and I apologize for that, but I will provide that probably at a later date. And it'll be a good tool for getting all this information at least available for people to take a look at. And we had set December 2nd, which is Monday, to get this thing live, but we actually have information already on board, so feel free to take a look at your leisure. So with that, that's kind of the status report. That's where we are with this periodic review. We're moving forward on a lot of fronts. And hopefully we'll be starting to get some real meaty data to you. I'm looking at the February meeting next year. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to respond to them.
Yes. So I think one of the takeaways from our Hillside experience last month was to try to find some way to reduce our density requirements for properties that are a part of the residential Bluff Conservancy. I don't know the right place to put that into our code. As far as I could tell, only the Shoreline Master Program makes reference to the residential Bluff Conservancy. I didn't see anything in the municipal code for that, but I'm not sure about the interplay between the Shoreline Master Program and the zoning parts of the code. Can we put something into the SMP that then becomes a development requirement for zoning in the code?
The SMP does include regulations. It may actually be a belt and suspenders kind of approach. We might want to do it in the SMP as well as in the basic definitions section of the municipal code as well.
Okay.
Assuming there aren't any hurdles in terms of actually implementing that idea, it may make the most sense to have it in both places.
That sounds like a fine plan. So I hope that we'll see that as we move forward with the SMP.
If that's one of the recommendations that we get from our consultant that we're working with, then we'll move forward with it. But yes.
Well, I'd like to see us move forward with it one way.
That issue.
Oh, okay, yeah,
I
yeah.
understand what Mr. McPheeters is talking about. It's more of a local density issue than
Yes.
it is a environmental condition.
Gotcha.
Although I tend to think that it's reinforcing what the goals are of the SMP. So, okay.
So-
That's all I've got.
So being the devil's advocate, where does the property owner's rights fit into all this?
Well,
How does that
that's
work?
part of the balancing act here, and that's one of the
Yeah,
things
I mean-
that Dennis has pointed out in our consultant approach. We are looking to balance the environmental needs with the private property rights. And so obviously, as we talk about either updating the SMP or updating the municipal code or both, we'll have to have a public process. At least in both of those would require public hearing before the planning commission and potentially one before the city council. So property owners have the ability to weigh in on that. Also important to note that we have privately owned tidelands that are not found in the residential Bluff Conservancy area. So while that subject came up during the last preliminary plat that we talked about out in that area, we have that same scenario in other places, namely along Pioneer Way. There are some lots there that have private tidelands.
Okay.
So it's not an issue that's unique to the residential Bluff Conservancy. It is in the shoreline area, so there's that more general connection.
Okay.
Is there any place in the city of Oak Harbor that the city's property or the county has property that's not privately owned on the bluff? Is there?
To the best of my knowledge, we don't have any public holdings along the bluff.
The county does.
I don't know that, I don't believe the county does inside of our jurisdictional boundaries.
Okay,
They probably have some of their own in their jurisdiction, but
Well,
not inside of the city.
Monroe Landing comes to mind, but that's in the county, and
Yeah, that's out.
that's,
I'd like to piggyback on your discussion just now about the tidelands also, because I think we may want to even bring in changes to critical areas ordinance where you can give a homeowner or a property owner the permission to not do minimum lots, minimum thank you. Yeah, minimum density in areas where there's critical areas. So, for example, in the Bluff or the case where they own tidelands, we've got a lot of properties along Pioneer Way where if you include the tidelands, they may be required right now to have a minimum of, let me just pull a number, 15 dwellings on a lot that, quite frankly, only has, room for 6 dwellings if you look at the actual ground surface. But if the property owner doesn't want to do 15, and we're trying to require him to, why can't we just say, yeah, you don't have to count the critical areas? And that doesn't just apply to tidelands, it applies to areas where you got wetlands. Why are we forcing increased density at the at the expense of environmental concerns when the property owner doesn't want to sacrifice the environment? So that's something that we want to get to too, I think.
Just as a quick thought, it is very rare that people tell us they want to do less density than what is allowed.
Yeah.
I won't say that it never happens, because there are some circumstances, primarily where it's something that the density might say you should do 3 units, and for whatever reason, I only want to do 2. But in terms of development kind of things, it's pretty rare to have somebody say they want to do less than what the code would allow them to do. But I understand the general point that you're making, Mr. Hovey. I think it's worthy of conversation.
On page 592 and 593, you have a long list of interested parties, stakeholders, et cetera. And on page 595, where you show the target timeline, the stakeholders meeting isn't included until over a year into the process. And, I think that one thing that was learned from, and oh, by the way, that stakeholders meeting is not held until after potential drafts are already offered. I think one of the things we learned under Windjammer Park process was that it never hurts to have extra public participation, and I personally would like to see a stakeholders meeting at least 6 or 9 months earlier, where you have an attempt to get more public input much earlier on. I don't know that there's going to be any, but certainly, as we learned from the Scenic Heights experience, there was a lot of interest in that.
I think that's a good point, and I do think, correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but I think we have the flexibility to be able to do that. I just would like to wait until we have maybe some substantive amendments or something that we're really looking at changing to bring forth to the stakeholders group, but certainly to get their input back would be valuable as well, so.
And also, as I read your target timeline there, Dennis, the draft is not a draft of the entire SMP, it's a draft of the consultant study. Is that
Yeah,
correct?
yes, yeah, and
So, Mr. Hovey, if you notice, we've got a stakeholders meeting March of 2020. And that's well in advance of, I believe, because we're not even initiating the draft review until, I'm sorry, that might be misreading that.
well, it would be about the same time is what I was anticipating.
So you're
We would get
expecting
the
that-
consultant results, we would have a stakeholders meeting, we have some substance of the program itself, consultant review of their findings, and that was the intent.
Okay. But my point is that we want to get the stakeholders in as early as possible.
Thank you.
thank you, Howard. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Thank you, Dennis.
All right, happy Thanksgiving.
Yes, same to you, staff. Well, there's no other items on the agenda. Our next meeting will be in 2 weeks, December 10th. We certainly don't want to meet on Christmas Eve, at least I don't want to. So the public knows that, it's the 10th of December. Having no other items to deal with this evening, I call this meeting adjourned.
We're gonna miss that one on the 10th. I got an appointment in Linwood that afternoon.